You didn't lose them because God stopped loving you. You lost them because God loved you enough to stop you from becoming someone you were never meant to be. That loss you're carrying, the one that carved out your chest and left you hollow, the one that made you question if breathing is even worth the effort anymore. That wasn't abandonment. That was surgery without anesthesia. And God held the scalpel because He was the only one steady enough to cut that deep without killing you. You wake up every morning and the first thought isn't gratitude, it's survival. It's the math of making it through another day pretending you're whole when you know you're walking around with pieces missing, and nobody taught you how to grieve something that felt like your entire reason for existing. You loved them, you loved that dream. You loved that version of your life so completely that you built your identity around it. And when it disappeared, you didn't just lose what you loved. You lost the mirror that showed you who you thought you were. Now you're here scrolling through videos at 3 in the morning because sleep feels like giving up, and giving up feels like betraying their memory, and everyone around you thinks you should be over it by now because the funeral was months ago, the divorce was finalized, the diagnosis became your new normal, but they don't understand that you're not mourning an event. You're mourning the death of the person you were before everything shattered. You replay the last conversation, the last touch, the last moment of normalcy, and you search for the exact second where you could have changed the outcome, where you could have held on tighter, prayed harder, loved better. But that second doesn't exist because this wasn't about your worthiness or your strength. You feel guilty when you laugh because how dare you experience joy when they can't. You feel guilty when you cry because shouldn't you be stronger by now? You feel guilty when you move forward because it feels like forgetting, and you feel guilty when you stay stuck because it feels like wasting the life they would have wanted you to live. The truth that nobody tells you about loss is that it doesn't just take what you loved, it reveals what you were built on. And if you built your entire foundation on that person, that relationship, that dream, that health, that certainty, then when it's gone, you're not standing on solid ground anymore. You're free falling, and the fall is so terrifying that you'd rather cling to the grief than risk discovering who you are without them. You became who they needed you to be. You shaped yourself around their expectations, their presence, their love. And it felt like purpose. It felt like home. But God is not interested in you being comfortable in someone else's design. He's interested in you becoming who you were created to be before you learned to shrink yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant to contain you. That loss wasn't random, it wasn't cruel, it wasn't punishment for some hidden sin you can't remember committing. It was the most painful form of liberation because you were never going to leave on your own. You were never going to choose yourself over them. You were never going to risk their disappointment by becoming the raw, unfiltered, messy version of yourself that God actually recognizes. Listen to what I'm about to say because this is the part that will either break you open or keep you buried. God didn't take them away from you. God took you away from a version of yourself that was dying slowly while everyone applauded how well you were holding it together. You were disappearing into their needs, their chaos, their definition of who you should be. And you called it love. You called it loyalty. You called it faith. But it was actually self-abandonment dressed up in noble language. And if that loss hadn't happened, you would have woken up 10 years from now and not recognized your own face in the mirror. Not because you aged, but because you erased yourself one compromise at a time. The person you were before the loss wasn't the healthiest version of you. It was just the version you got used to. And God loves you too much to let you stay comfortable in a cage just because you decorated it beautifully. That relationship was teaching you that your value came from how useful you could be. That dream was teaching you that your worth was measured by achievement. That version of life was teaching you that control was possible if you just worked hard enough. And all of those lessons were lies, but you believed them because they gave you a sense of purpose, even if that purpose was slowly crushing you. God didn't take them to hurt you. God took them to wake you up. To shatter the illusion that you could build a life on anything other than the foundation of knowing who you are when everything else is stripped away. And I know that sounds brutal. I know it feels like I'm minimizing your pain. But your pain is valid and this truth can coexist. Both can be real at the same time. You're allowed to grieve what you lost. You're allowed to feel the full weight of the absence. You're allowed to scream at God for the way He chose to save you, because make no mistake, this was salvation. Not in the neat Sunday school way where everything gets better immediately, but in the bloody, agonizing way where you have to die to who you were in order to discover who you're meant to become. Every tear you've cried, every sleepless night, every moment of questioning if you'll ever feel normal again, those aren't signs that you're broken beyond repair. Those are signs that you're finally awake enough to feel the surgery that's been happening beneath the surface. And healing doesn't look like going back to who you were. Healing looks like having the courage to become someone new. So what do you do now, when you're standing in the ruins of your old life and you can't see the blueprint for what comes next? When everyone expects you to move on but you don't even know which direction forward is supposed to be? You start by giving yourself permission to not have it figured out, to not be okay, To not be the inspirational story of resilience that makes everyone else comfortable, because your healing is not a performance for their peace of mind. You start by sitting in the emptiness without trying to fill it immediately with distractions, with new relationships, with frantic productivity, with anything that keeps you from feeling the full weight of what's actually happening inside you. Because that emptiness is not your enemy. It's the space where God is finally able to speak to you without all the noise of what you thought your life was supposed to be. You start by asking yourself what you actually want, not what they would have wanted for you, not what would make your family proud, not what would prove to everyone that you're fine. But what makes you feel alive in a way that's honest, even if it's messy, even if it's small, even if it's so simple that it embarrasses you to admit it out loud. You start by forgiving yourself for all the ways you think you failed them, for the words you didn't say, the time you wasted on arguments that don't matter. Now the moments you were too tired or too distracted or too human to be perfect, because you were never supposed to be perfect. You were supposed to be present, and presence is all any of us can offer, and it's always enough even when it doesn't feel like enough in hindsight. You start by understanding that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It means integrating. It means carrying them with you in a new way, not as an open wound that bleeds every time you try to take a step, but as a scar that proves you survived something that should have destroyed you but didn't, because God had other plans. You start by reclaiming the parts of yourself that you abandoned to make room for them. The hobbies you quit, the dreams you postponed, the boundaries you dissolved, the voice you silenced. And you do this not because they were bad for you, but because you deserve to exist as a whole person, not as a supporting character in someone else's story. You weren't supposed to stay who you were supposed to grow, to transform, to shed the skin of the person who believed their worth came from being needed, from being useful, from being the strong one, from being the one who never breaks. And maybe the only way you were ever going to let go of that false identity was if it was ripped away from you. And I know that's a hard pill to swallow. I know it feels cruel. But God is not in the business of making you comfortable. He's in the business of making you whole. And sometimes those two things are violently opposed to each other. The faith you're being asked to have now is not the faith of certainty, not the faith that says if you pray hard enough, everything will go back to the way it was. It's the faith of surrender, the faith that says, I don't understand this, I don't like this. I'm angry and confused and heartbroken, but I trust that there's a purpose in this pain that I can't see yet, and I'm willing to keep breathing until it reveals itself, even if it takes years, even if it never makes complete sense, even if the only thing I ever understand is that I survived. You're not the same person you were before the loss, and that's not a tragedy, that's a testimony, that's proof that you're still alive enough to evolve, still soft enough to be reshaped, still open enough to let God work in the wreckage. The person you were was beautiful, was loved, was doing their best with what they knew. But they were also limited by fear, by people-pleasing, by the need for external validation, by the belief that their value was conditional on performance, and God loved you too much to let you die a slow death inside a life that looked good on the outside, but was crushing your spirit in private. What you loved was real, the pain of losing it is real, the grief is valid, the anger is justified. But so is the possibility that on the other side of this devastation is a version of you that's more authentic, more free, more aligned with who you were created to be before the world taught you to hide. God didn't take what you loved to punish you. God took what you loved to save you from a future where you would have looked back and realized you spent your entire life being who everyone else needed you to be, and never once asked yourself what you needed, what you wanted, what your soul was crying out for underneath all the obligation and expectation.